Several different models. First program was the Best Friends model of care for dementia. The second is dementia capable care. And I'm also a certified Montessori dementia care practitioner. So it all sounds very nice and very fancy, but the one thing that I learned that is the most important when working with folks with dementia is it doesn't really matter what program you're using. It matters the people that you're serving, how you go into the relationship, and the support that you have as a caregiver. And so that's what I'm really going to focus on today, is talking a little bit about the disease itself and what we do as caregivers to support ourselves and the people that we're caring for. So first, I want to talk a little bit about dementia. Dementia is not actually a disease. I've worked with a lot of folks who have said, oh, you know, they got dementia and that's the disease that they're living with. Dementia is actually a set of symptoms that affects your memory, your cognition, your social abilities on a level that is severe enough to impact your daily functioning. The set of symptoms, the ones that we're going to be talking about today, are caused by disease processes such as Alzheimer's disease, which is the #1 leading cause of dementia. Now, there are some types of dementia that can be reversible. The ones that we're going to be talking about today are all degenerative disease processes, which means that over time, they do get worse, and there is no known cure right now for the diseases that we will talk about. Alzheimer's disease is, like I mentioned, the most prevalent disease process that does cause dementia. It's characterized by a very slow, gradual decline, generally over a period of 8 to 10 years. Vascular disease is a disease process that affects your vascular system, so your heart. A lack of oxygen to the brain is something that can cause dementia. So things like heart attacks, strokes, hypertension or high blood pressure, diabetes, those disease processes work together to create damage to the brain. And depending on what part of the brain is damaged is how you will see the signs and symptoms of dementia take effect. There's Parkinson's disease, which is primarily known as a movement disorder. But with Parkinson's disease, it can also affect your brain. So you'll quite often see people very similar to Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's kind of go hand in hand. You'll see movement disorders and really an up and down trajectory where maybe somebody is really experiencing a lot of symptoms one day, and then the next day they kind of seem to perk up a little bit and they go up and down like that for some time. And then there's frontotemporal dementia, which is another well-known type that affects the front part of your brain, which is primarily responsible for kind of your filter. So a lot of times frontotemporal dementia affects folks who are earlier in your 40s and 50s and even your early 60s. And so sometimes it can be missed because it's not actually, people are too young for dementia. It's characterized more by personality changes. So over time, a lot of people have asked me, well, if they're all degenerative diseases, and really the best way to manage these diseases are through symptom management, does it really matter what type of dementia that I have? And I always say, yes, it does, because although all of these diseases are characterized by that set of symptoms that is dementia, they all take a little bit different trajectory, and they can be supported a little bit differently. So it's important, I think, for when you're starting to see symptoms, to be able to work with a physician to actually find out what your diagnosis is. And then that way you can also connect yourself with support that is other people who are maybe dealing with the similar things that you might be. So when discussing this topic with audiences, I really like to talk to the people that we're caring for. So I want everyone to take a moment and picture in their mind a personal or professional connection or experience, and think about that person or experience that you have worked with when it comes to dementia care. I'm just going to kind of give everyone a couple minutes to think about that. So now I'm going to ask, and this is a time to feel free and share with me, who is your person? for me, I can say it has been a family member. It's been a friend. And it's been somebody that I've worked for. So I have a lot of different personal connections. And so when I'm doing my work and educating others, I always like to bring that person into the forefront, because being able to connect with the actual person is one of the best things that you can do for someone who is living with dementia. You'll also hear me say a lot, living with dementia. For quite a long time, when I would talk to people about dementia or their experiences, I always heard the phrase, well, something that they're suffering with, or, it always had a negative connotation. And I really like to remember that people who have dementia are still living. They're still worthy of dignity. They're still worthy of respect. They're worthy of any other thing that any other person would be. They're still living. And so although there is a lot of sadness and there is a lot of challenge and there is a lot of loss, I do like to reframe how we look at dementia so that we can go into it serving who is our person, our family, our friend, our spouse, our partner, our neighbor, and go into it with a really open heart. So who is our caregiver? How many of you, I'm going to do like a simple poll. You can either put it in the chat, or if you did want to unmute yourself. Who here is a caregiver or has been a caregiver for somebody living with dementia?
Here I am.
Okay. I see a couple other people that has been sent to me in the chat as a personal experience. So some of the things that I'm going to share with you come from alzheimers.org. Every year they put out a really nice publication of Alzheimer's disease facts and figures report. And really they're estimating this off of 11 million Americans are caregivers for somebody who is living with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. 41% of those people are from a household with an income less than $50,000. In my experience, when you are working to support somebody who is living with dementia, the care that you can provide for them is generally based upon what you can afford. There's not a lot of social supports that are available that don't have some type of income requirement or a need to be able to have a way to pay for it. So that's private duty, someone to come and help relieve our caregivers. Assisted living and nursing homes are very expensive. And so when you are a caregiver who is already from a household that maybe has struggles with some finances, that can place an enormous burden on our caregivers. 30% of these people are age 65 and older. So go back to that person that you're caring for and think about being 65, being, in this time in your life where you are maybe heading into retirement, maybe you're starting to feel the effects of getting a little bit older, dealing with your own age-related diseases. I know I've hit 40 and I already feel like I have some hip problems, so I can imagine when I hit 65 or older, I might struggle with that as well. Going into a caregiving relationship, being a little bit older, does present some of its challenges. 60% are in a long-term relationship or a marriage. And so I think that when a lot of us commit to a person in a long-term relationship, we always kind of go into it with the good and the bad. And so being a caregiver also comes in, it's an obligation that we undertake. We don't always go into a caregiving relationship knowing that we're going to be a caregiver. Sometimes we're thrown into it because it's what you do. And so there are a lot of different ways to enter into a caregiving relationship. And a lot of these people are spouses. 2/3 of these people are women. And a quarter of these people are from what's referred to as the sandwich generation. So these are people who are middle-aged, who are caring for their children, and also at the same time caring for aging either parents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, whoever that person is. And so you have these people who are really struggling on both ends of the life continuum and meeting needs on a very different spectrum. So now think about these caregivers. I find this fact to be incredibly interesting. In 2020, there was an estimated 15.3 billion hours of informal, more commonly known as unpaid assistance, which is valued at $256.7 billion. That is a lot of unpaid assistance provided by what is referred to as informal caregivers. That doesn't count, the agencies that employ caregivers. It doesn't count your assisted living, your skilled nursing, your rehab facilities, your adult day programs, your formal paid caregivers. This is from the families, those people 65 and older, those spouses, those women, those people in the sandwich generation. That's enough money really to fund a small country. And when you think about caregiving, there are a lot of unintended consequences from caregiving. Now, I always tell people, and this is something I have said for years and years, being able to be a caregiver is an enormous gift. Being a caregiver from people I've talked to has been an honor. It's been a privilege. It's brought people closer. It's been mutually beneficial. But there are also consequences to caregiving. It is physically demanding work for someone who has mobility issues. When you are living with memory care issues, we'll talk about some of the other challenges that come with it. It can be very emotional work. It can be very taxing, especially for our sandwich generation, to come home from work, get the kids ready, get whoever they're caring for ready. There is a lot that goes into caregiving. So for as wonderful and as noble as it is to be a caregiver, it is also very challenging. And so for those of you out there who are caregivers, please know that you are seen and recognized for the work that does go into it. And a lot of times the sacrifice that goes into it as well. Those unintended consequences, money. So there's a lot of personal and unrelated costs. So although you are considered that informal, AKA unpaid caregiver, a lot of times you may have to miss a day of work or leave early to take somebody to an appointment. You may have to take a leave of absence to care for somebody during a prolonged illness or something else that's going on. Somebody maybe falls, breaks a hip, or has different challenges. So that monetary consequence generally falls on those caregivers. Again, health, physical and emotional. It can be very physically taxing to be a full-time caregiver and a part-time caregiver for people. And again, it's very emotional. I think about the couples that I've worked with over the years. So those caregivers who are age 65 and older that have been in long-term relationships or who are married, those people who have started their lives out together, built families, grew together as one, and have been married 60 years, and then you're a caregiver, that relationship changes, and they have a lot of really big emotional impacts on our caregivers. Economic consequences. So those people who have to leave the workforce, that has more of a macro consequence on our society. And finally, taking a look at the social and racial disparities that it can create. So it should not be shocking that there is a disproportionate amount of people who have racial differences. So our Black folks, Asian folks who live in cycles of poverty, and there are those racial disparities. A lot of times it builds into that systemic issues that they face because they have to be that caregiver by default because they might not be able to access different levels of care. So one thing I like to talk about now that we've kind of identified who our person is, and I want everyone to remember who they thought about when I first asked you to recognize who you identify with. And then think about yourself as a caregiver and some of the challenges that you may have experienced. Because here's the part I want to talk about, maybe some tips or some tricks, and kind of explain why people who are living with Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body dementia and vascular disease why and how they are struggling with some of these challenges, and what can we do to support them. So this is always really important to remember. Your cognition, so your ability to think, to process. You get up in the morning, you can sequence what you need to do. I know that when I get up in the morning, I have to get my kids ready. I know that I have to, take my baby aspirin. I know that I have to get in the car. I have to get dressed. Being able to think and process that, it's the driver of all my functions throughout my day, and it impacts a lot. Eating and drinking. Over my entire career, I would say that this is one of the biggest concerns in working with families is my loved one isn't eating. I can't get them to drink anything. They're losing weight. I just don't know what to do. And the reason this is, it can be for a couple different reasons. When you're living with a disease process that presents itself with having symptoms of dementia, your brain chemistry can change. You don't feel hungry anymore. It can be because you can't sequence what to do. You forget to eat. You don't remember that it's lunchtime. You don't remember that it's dinner time. Physical challenges as we continue to decline with these disease processes. Maybe it's difficult to hold a spoon. Maybe you have had vascular dementia because you've had a stroke and it affects the right side of your body. And so you're generally right-handed and you're not able to lift a spoon or a fork to your mouth. And that's where when I go back and say that it can be really important to find out what type of disease process is causing your dementia. Is it vascular because you've had strokes or heart issues? Is it Alzheimer's? Because then you can really identify maybe where the challenge is coming from, what part of the brain might be affected, and then you can effectively put interventions in place that can help somebody succeed. So let's use the example, my loved one isn't eating because they just don't remember what time it is. They don't physically remember to eat. Simple things like putting somebody back in a social situation. So sitting down and eating with them. We like to educate people that there are 3 different kinds of cues that you can use when helping support somebody in the caregiving relationship. So those 3 cues, the first one is a verbal cue. So I can say, hey, Mom, can you go ahead and pick up your spoon and take a bite? Let me know how that soup tastes. I could actually show my mom and give her a visual cue. I can say, oh, I'm eating this soup. It tastes really good. Those cues might be enough to get her to pick that up. There's a thing called muscle memory, where when you have done something your entire life, and it's something that you do every day, you eat, the motion of that can be stimulated with those different types of cues. A tactile cue is actually physically using your hands. I've worked with residents before where I've actually put food on the fork, put the fork in their hand, started bringing the food up to their mouth, and or the cup in the hand, and that is enough to cue them to do it. Sometimes you need a combination of all 3. Also taking a look at what is the environment like. Is the environment overstimulating? Is there too much going on? Do I need to maybe turn the lights up so they can see the food? Dementia can affect the way your vision. A lot of times your peripheral vision gets smaller. So making sure that the food is right in front of somebody and that they can actively see it. For people who may be having mobility issues, maybe it's something like finger foods. Maybe you're going to make small sandwiches, or maybe you're just going to have a lot of appetizers, something that's small and digestible that isn't overwhelming, like, a huge plate of food. Maybe you'll do dinner in courses. There are also medications that sometimes can be utilized for people who have actually developed a lack of appetite. So that is very common. As you age, normally your taste buds really become dulled. The ability to taste sweet things is the last to go. So a lot of times I'll work with memory care and folks, and you can provide desserts, and nobody wants to give up dessert. So it usually goes over pretty well. when it comes to having your disease process advanced to when you become closer to end of life, and this is very difficult for a lot of caregivers that I've worked with, is there's this thing inside us that needs to provide that sustenance or needs to be able to feed somebody. They're very worried about their loved one starving to death or becoming thirsty. Our bodies are very intuitive and know what to do. And so even if somebody can't communicate, they can communicate. And so really, if you've exhausted all of the things that we've talked about, employed some cues, really focused on food that people like, maybe snacking throughout the day, trying some medications, and you still find that there is a consistent decline going on and somebody is not eating or drinking, that could be their body telling you that they're just ready to not have that food or drink. And it's very important at that point to work with whatever medical team. I'll talk a little bit about how hospice can support you in that journey, but not to over push it. The body loses its sense of hunger and thirst towards the end of life. And it does it specifically as your body starts to shut down, because eating and drinking when your body is trying to go through the dying process can effectively create more discomfort than it actually helps. And so being able to be aware of that and have that education does help people through the process. Activities of daily living. So that's you're getting dressed, you're brushing your teeth, taking a shower, going to the restroom, a lot of, physical, gross motor and fine motor tasks. One of probably the second biggest thing that is a challenge for a lot of caregivers I've worked with is people who are living with various diseases that cause dementia is hygiene. And getting somebody to be able to get in the shower. Quite often we hear, oh, I just took one this morning, and maybe it's been days or even weeks. Maybe it's been, oh, I plan on doing that later. I got this. And so being able to help somebody maintain hygiene is very important for things like keeping your skin clean and intact, not getting rashes that might be itchy or creating discomfort, and just helping somebody with their dignity. This can be really challenging, but I also find that using some of those cues or really paying attention to lifelong habits and maybe knowing their life history and life story. For instance, I'll use myself as an example. If I was in that situation and say I was struggling with hygiene and my caregiver wanted to prompt me into the shower, they would probably present me with some sort of brand new fancy face cream and say, I just bought this new fancy face cream. I really want you to try it out. Why don't we hop in the shower? You can let me know how it goes. So that way I'm pulling on something that resonates with something. It means something to me because I enjoy fancy face wash. And it's also paying attention to my dignity, because you're not telling me, okay, get undressed, get in the shower, you smell. You're actually providing an opportunity for me to continue to be independent, to be part of the process, while at the same time accomplishing some of those things. There are instrumental activities of daily living that caregivers sometimes need to help. And these are maybe some of those higher level functioning. So paying bills, being able to maintain a routine, driving a car. These are very difficult for people to give up, and they can, if not addressed, put people in the path for being so like somebody who still wants to manage, let's say, their bills online. If they're not able to do that, they can put themselves in a path of financial risk. Socialization is a really big one. Humans are social beings. When you have impaired cognition, you can really draw into yourself if you don't have the ability anymore to make those connections. And so socialization and activity is very important, and creating opportunities for somebody to still be social is really critical in helping support somebody have a high quality of life. And it's good for the caregiver too. One of the things that I've heard a lot of people say that I've worked with is, oh gosh, they just sleep all day long. They just watch TV all day long. And then you see boredom set in, and you see people withdraw and have maybe depression, and then they really do stop eating and drinking. So being able to pay attention to how to help somebody still feel engaged in the world. So I'll use myself as an example again. If I had trouble being able to socialize, I would want my caregiver to recognize, what does socialization mean to me? I'm not somebody who, goes out to parties. I'm more of an introverted person when it comes to my socialization needs. So, maybe it would be somebody would put my favorite book on tape and let me listen to that and still be engaged. Or maybe it would be putting Days of Our Lives on a loop so I could actually watch something that would keep me, it would resonate with me and I could be engaged and have socialization that way. And honestly, I always tell people, sometimes just simply being with somebody, being able to share a comfortable silence is all that somebody needs to feel heard. Communication, not being able to communicate. We find this a lot with people who have had strokes or more advanced dementias. Not being able to say you're hungry, you're thirsty, not being able to communicate that you have to go to the restroom. Sometimes it's very helpful to use things like, if you're giving somebody a choice, use a closed-ended question with two choices. So let's say you're a caregiver for somebody and you're helping them get dressed. Would you like to wear the blue shirt today, or do you want to wear your flowered shirt? It still provides opportunity for somebody to have choice. It's still dignified, but again, you're providing it in a way that allows somebody to be able to participate effectively so that frustration doesn't happen. Emotions are a big thing. We do find that because of the brain changes with people who are living with different diseases that cause dementia, anxiety, sometimes being aggressive can come along with the disease process. My experience is you can mitigate a lot of that with the right cues and the right setup, but they do happen. It's the same thing when we talk about different types of behaviors. And I would say emotions and behaviors are some of the most challenging things to get around. I've had so many different scenarios that I can bring up here, but I would like to invite, when I stop talking, for somebody maybe to share a scenario in which they have had a struggle. Maybe we can kind of problem solve it together. But things like, I hear the word escape a lot, and really, people are just exploring their environment. Quite often people are trying to get home, not really knowing where home is. It's more a feeling of safety they're trying to get to, or familiarity. And so how do you help identify what somebody is actually looking for and actually means, and intervene in a way, again, that is dignified and respectful of the person that they are? Sleep is a big one. So quite often your sleep dysregulation is when your sleep patterns are opposite. So sometimes people will sleep quite a bit or will reverse their sleeping. I find that for people who have a lot of sleep challenges at night, it's because they're not properly engaged during the day. So if you're sleeping all day, you're probably going to have trouble sleeping at night. So it is important to help keep people as engaged and mobile as possible during the day so that their body naturally does tire at night. However, I also have found, working with a lot of different physicians and clinical folks, there are some medications that can be effective for sleep. And some other non-pharmacological interventions. So again, exercise, going for a walk before bed, sometimes sleepy time tea, chamomile tea. I always tell people, draw into the history. Do you have a history of having trouble sleeping, and what has worked for you in the past? And always try and start there. And relationships. Again, I'm just going to kind of touch on those abilities to have relationships. Those are really critical, to feel loved, to feel accepted. Those are things that are natural needs in us as humans. And Having diseases that cause dementia can be very isolating, not only for the person who is living with it, but for also their caregiver. It's a very stigmatized and negative disease when you are no longer kind of keeping up with daily life. And so relationships in those caregiving relationships can be really impacted. And so it is important to be able to find things for yourself that you can continue to feel like you have community and support, which is what we're going to talk about in this slide. How can caregivers be prepared? So really assessing where you are as a caregiver, knowing what your knowledge is. Is this something you feel that you need more education on? Do you know what to do in the case of an emergency? And I always tell people commitment. Not everybody is meant to be a caregiver. Some people find themselves in situations where they're like, I never wanted to be a caregiver, and now I'm in this position and I hate it. You really do have to have some level of commitment to it, or else you're not going to be a good caregiver, and that's not good for you or the person you're caring for. So I always talk that through with people who are in those positions. Sometimes people can come around to being a caregiver and it ends up being a really great relationship. And then some families I've worked with just said, it's just not in me to do. And that's okay too. You shouldn't feel shame if it's something that is just not within you. You want people who are living with memory care and dementia to be amongst people who are going to be committed to getting them what they need. Identify your support system, know your primary care physician, know what resources are in your area. Alzheimer's.org is always a really great resource. They have a 24-hour helpline. You don't have to necessarily just have Alzheimer's to call. They will support people and caregivers. Find a support group. Know what's in your area. Have important documents available. So if you are a caregiver for somebody, if you're a spouse, if you're a child or a neighbor, if you're somebody's medical power of attorney, have those important documents available and have those conversations regularly so you don't get stuck in a crisis situation and have to make a decision that you don't feel prepared to make. So I always tell people that is a really important thing. Have a quick list of go-tos. I love when caregivers know their person really well. So I'll use myself as an example. If I had to be a caregiver eventually for my husband, I would have to know that I need a can of Diet Coke. I'd need to make sure he had music, and I'd kind of have to let him just do what he wanted throughout the day. Those would be my quick list of go-tos to help satisfy that situation. Awareness of self-care. If you are a caregiver, make sure you take time for you to be rested, to feel supported, to take a minute to make sure that you can energize yourself and be good for you. And then find some inspiration and motivation to keep you going. There is a reason that assisted livings and nursing homes exist, because they have people working in shifts. Being a caregiver for somebody with memory care is exhausting, mentally and physically, especially if you work with somebody who needs a high level of physical assistance. It can be very taxing. So make sure that if you're in this position and you're committed to it, that you continue to find inspiration in what you're doing. It will go a long way. The next slide. So how can hospice help? The hospice philosophy really focuses on symptom management and quality of life. So with all of the disease processes that cause dementia, Alzheimer's disease, vascular issues, frontotemporal, Lewy body, all of those, there is no cure. It really is managing symptoms and helping somebody have a high quality of life. So the two main things that are really kind of the treatment for people who have dementia falls right in line with the hospice philosophy. And because dementia is a degenerative disease, it gets worse over time. And so that means it's not going to get better. And so that is true for a lot of people who join hospice. It's because they have recognize that there is a consistent decline in somebody and they want to focus on comfort, hospice at that point can really be appropriate because hospice manages symptoms. They provide emotional support. They give education on caregiving and resources. We offer spiritual support, bereavement counseling, and help you through that end of life journey so you're not alone. Because it is a Medicare covered benefit, there is eligibility criteria that you have to meet. And that is assuming that you are a Medicare recipient. There are people who have dementia that are not Medicare eligible, or people who might still be working. But in the hospice realm, when it comes to insurance, we are held by Medicare guidelines, which are the most stringent among most insurances. So the eligibility criteria for hospice is, we kind of gauge by that. But we do find that a vast majority of patients with dementia on hospice generally have some type of Medicare or managed care Medicare covered benefit. But if you're not sure, check with your local hospice provider. If you have questions and you want to know if someone you're a caregiver for is eligible for that service, it doesn't hurt to just pick up the phone and ask. I'll use our organization as an example. If you didn't know, we would expect that you would call us. You know, our mission is not, and the mission of most hospices is to provide a service. And whether or not you come to our hospice is really irrelevant. We want to be able to give you helping hand and information when it's needed.